Welcome to the Volunteer and Combination Officer section weekly webinar series. We at the VCOS hope to educate our leaders in the fire service and those who aspire to become leaders of how to help manage volunteers as well as combination staff departments. Today, we're going to talk about critical thinking and what does it mean. You might say, well, I already know how to think. Well, in many cases, you know how to think at the surface level. And many times we don't dig deep to try to find the root cause of some of the problems that we're going to talk about today. So we have three great presenters, and they'll introduce themselves in a minute here. But, we use voice over IP technology, same thing we do all the time. If you should have problems, you can go to the chat function, which should be in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Or you can email webinars@ifc.org and we will help you. But I will tell you, we've had it happen. Technology sometimes breaks. If it freezes up, log out, log back in. Many times that will take care of your problem. So, we do want you to register. Or now I'd like to know who's in the chat room. Maybe there's some comments that you want to make that I can share with our speakers later. We will save questions for the end of the presentation. So there are handouts that we will, put the PowerPoint up there for you guys for everybody to download. But you're welcome to share your comments. We want to know. Submit questions for the speakers. It's all very important. They do have some resources in the PowerPoint presentation that will be good for you to research. What does the Volunteer and Combination Officer section do? Well, we have been in business since 1994. Prior to that, we were a committee within the International Association of Fire Chiefs. I'm not going to read you all the things that are on the screen there, but we have lots of different things that the VCOS is doing. And I hope one of the places you go, in addition to watching the weekly webinar, is go look at our ribbon reports. We have done about 6 ribbon reports that cover a vast variety of different topics. So we encourage you to do that. We have a program on chaplains. If you want a chaplain program, we have a brand new program on support canines. So we look for you to go download those reports. They're all free of charge, whether you're a member or whether you're not. So our biggest event at the VCOS, and again, you can see these webinars that are coming up. Every Tuesday we're doing a webinar, but it's not on the screen, is our Symposium in the Sun at Clearwater Beach, Hilton Resorts, every November. If you want to go to that, you have got to register early. We have filled up usually about a month ahead for the last 8 years. So don't wait to the last minute to try to register, because you won't be able to you won't be able to get registered. So the topic today, critical thinking, what does it mean? We have 3 outstanding presenters here who know critical thinking, and they use it in their management of their fire departments, or in one of our speakers' case, in teaching critical thinking to her students. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Kevin McGee to kick off the program. Kevin, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Chief Buckman. I appreciate you all joining us on this, what we feel is a critical topic. And I want to introduce our panel today. There's Chief Al Yancey. I'm Kevin McGee. We are both fire chiefs, and we have many decades of experience in the fire service, rising through the ranks, and strong educational backgrounds. We're both very active at the state and national levels of the fire service, both actively engaged in the International Association of Fire Chiefs. Chief Yancey is currently on the board of directors for the VCOS. And we also have with us, and we're very fortunate today to have Kate Marquise, right?
Marquis. But it's a hard one.
I've been practicing that. Al and I are the practitioners. Kate is the subject matter expert. She has a tremendous amount of background in critical thinking, and she teaches this at the university level at Georgetown University, and has had a number of critically important roles with the U.S. government, practicing critical thinking skills. And she has taught the subject at the local, state, and federal and international levels. And so we're very fortunate to have you here with us today, Kate. Thank you. And by the way, her husband is a fire chief in Northern Virginia, who is also a member of on the board of directors of VCOS. This subject is very important to us because I know that Al and I have experienced how important it is to practice critical thinking skills with the many challenges that we've had to deal with over the years. And we want to share with you some of what we have learned and really scratch the surface of what critical thinking is.
So this might be a good time to invite everyone just to take a pause and think for 1 second about, if we can go back.
Okay, oh, that
To
was
the
me.
title, yeah. What is critical thinking? This phrase. I teach a webinar, like a lesson like this all the time. And usually I'm teaching in person to a group of 20 or 30 people. I usually teach to a white collar expert audience where people have bachelor's and master's degrees in political science or in policy. And I ask them, what is critical thinking? Does anyone here have a definition that you know and love? And I'm curious to kind of know where we're at with this group today. If anyone does have a definition, or if you know for sure you don't know what this phrase critical thinking means, if you can signal in the chat, we'll have John take a quick survey on whether there is anyone who would want to volunteer a definition. Because in reality, in my regular experience, usually that room full of 20 and 30 people do not have any comfort with the notion of what critical thinking means. We use this phrase all the time. It's in our performance review. It's in our job descriptions. Candidate must show strong critical thinking and leadership skills. But when you ask people what we think that means, we really feel at sea. So I'm curious, John, is there anyone who's offered a definition? Or are we mainly getting folks saying problem solving is a great one? Or do we have a lot of folks who are like most of my students going, yeah, I don't have a great definition I love? It isn't magic. And if this is the first time you're having this conversation, you are in good company. A lot of people I know, synthesizing knowledge, awesome. Evaluation. Oh, props on recognizing cognitive bias. I have to say when, and someone found it, of our favorite quote about the intellectually disciplined process. In my encounter with the fire service, I have been really impressed at the number of people who actually have given some thought to what critical thinking means. So I expect that some of you will not be surprised to hear our content, but if you are someone who hasn't yet really engaged with this, the definition I offer my students that I think is a really workable definition is that critical thinking is knowing what you believe, why you believe it, and what you should do about it. It doesn't have to be magic. It doesn't have to be some kind of special HR function that you need to be able to manage to get promoted. You just need to know what you believe, why you believe it, and what you're going to do about it. If that helps relieve some of the stress about what this is all about, I hope that's great, because you do move pretty quickly to some of the more formal definitions. It's a pretty dense text. This first tick here helps us tee up a comparison between two ways of thinking about critical thinking that appear in our literature, in some of the research on what critical thinking means. This first tick, like I say, is a pretty dense paragraph. Someone already has captured it in the chat. I'll give everyone a minute to read that to yourself. It's about intellect. It's about your brain. It's about discipline. There's a process involved in this. It's about a skill. You're going to reflect. You're going to reason. There's a lot going on in that tick. One of the things that I like to highlight is that a lot of the words in that tick are verbs, they're action words, right? Critical thinking is not something you have, it's something that you do when we think about this intellectually disciplined kind of critical thinking. And in this particular type of critical thinking, what we're really focusing on here is making really conscious, making disciplined, making really transparent to yourself and to others all the reasons you have for believing something, what the information basis is for your thinking, what you've synthesized together, how you've analyzed something to come to a view. When we talk about this in the fire service, it is also, I think, really helpful to call out a second kind of critical thinking, which is a subconscious process focused on choosing a course of action. In some of the literature, you'll see this referred to as recognition-primed decision-making. And this comes to this notion of observation and experience. This comes to the notion of having, through your training process, we see this particularly in firefighting, where we train people to recognize different kinds of scenes and have ready, even without conscious thought, be able to look at a scene and propose a course of action, even if you can't say exactly why in that moment you're going to recommend it. When you've left the scene, you've finished fighting your fire, then you can reflect on what the information was that you in retrospect recognize as the signals for why you believed a certain course of action was going to be the best. It is a kind of critical thinking, and it's something that's important to train to. But we might see over the course of today's webinar that it's useful to talk about both of these kinds of critical thinking. They'll become tools for us in different kinds of contexts, depending on what it is that we're talking about. The first is going to be about making really reasoned, careful, transparent, conscious decisions. And the second then will be fueled by subconscious effort. And we'll talk Al can tee up for us why we think this is important and why we're spending time on this today.
Thanks, Kate. So we look at why is critical thinking important, and obviously the kind of jobs that we're in, but as Kate talked about, that's a question we ask. It's a performance review that we do for our own people. Like, why is this important? Because it's an increasingly dangerous operating environment. We know about the resource challenges. We have to be transparent. There's always the questions asked about, well, why did you arrive at this decision? How did you arrive at making this particular decision? And we need confidence from our own members and the people that we work with, whether you are a company officer, chief officer, firefighter working amongst other firefighters. The decision that we make, are we thoughtful about it? Are we making critical decisions, and we're making decisions that affect the company, the crew, the community. And we need to make good decisions. One of the things we've talked about with the VCOS, our motto, the tagline that we use is leaders in critical thinking. And we sit around and we will have that conversation about what exactly does that mean. Thinking critically for the incidents or the issues or the topic that we're addressing. And so when we start thinking about where we're going with this, there are important thoughts that we have, and some of those are conversations that we have to say, well, let's think outside of the box. And when we started putting this program together, talking to Kevin and Kate and saying, that's a phrase that so many people use about thinking outside of the box. And you sit in a conversation with multiple people and you're stuck on where do we go with this decision? How do we make this decision? And someone will usually say, well, we have to think outside of the box. And oftentimes we don't really know how to apply that. And this example that you see on the slide is, how do we connect these dots? Connect the dots by drawing 4 straight lines or fewer without lifting your pen. Well, you can see on the slide there that the thought outside of the box which worked was going outside of the box without lifting your pen. Like, we get so focused on, we have to think here and we have to think about this. So how do we really apply that outside of the box concept when we use that word and that phrase so many times to describe what we should be thinking? In reality, when we look at getting out of our box, how do we get outside of that box when we we're so often to say, well, let's start thinking outside of the box. Everyone think outside of the box. It's hard to get out of your box. Our brains are wired to take shortcuts, which constantly bring us back into the box. It's like the force field that brings us back into how we can't really get out of that box. And some of those, as you can see from the slide, is what puts us there. It's the frame that we're in. It's the biases that we have. We talk about this in the fire service about we have to get out of our silos to be better at not only just our regional approach or the things that we do in the fire service, but working together and partnering together. But we have to get out of our own brain sometimes. And what are our habits, the limits that we set for ourselves that we don't really start to reach outside of that box. And the interesting thing as we research this and really start talking about critical thinking is we can even switch from one box to another. So when we start thinking about how do we get out of our box, and when you think about, like, I really try to not use that phrase in a conversation if I can avoid it, unless I really think I'm going to make application to the process of thinking outside of the box. I have to think differently about things. And one other piece that VCOS is working on is like data and relying on research and information to get our brains to think differently about a particular topic. Some that are so deeply entrenched in the fire service that we struggle to get ourselves outside of that silo or the biases that we are already in, to start thinking about things differently. You'll hear Chief Buckman, you'll hear other people in the fire service that are out there teaching regularly to say data, data, data. This isn't a webinar about data, but it is about trying to utilize research and good foundational knowledge. We'll talk about some more in this webinar to really apply the term thinking outside of the box.
And Al, can I share an example?
Yeah.
When I was appointed as the fire marshal, I stepped into a very difficult situation with the fire marshal's office and the development community, where the development community would submit a plan for us to review and also to do inspections on fire protection systems. And we had a very poor record with the development community, where about 90% of the plans that came in were rejected. And the staff were demoralized. The development community has lost trust in working in Prince William because they knew they had to work with the county fire marshal's office. And so the approach that we took is we had to, where you see frame and paradigm and perspective, we had to reframe. We reframed from being what we felt we were an enforcement agency to what we wanted to be as a code compliance agency. And it's like, so what were the actions that we could take to be able to become a code compliance agency? And we got ideas from everyone on the staff about how we could share our knowledge with the development community so that they would know how to submit a successful plan for our review. And by just doing that reframing, we eliminated the biases that we had, that we had bad developers out there who were just trying to get over on the fire marshal's office, to understanding that these were people who took pride in the projects that they were submitting to us and wanted to do the right thing, but didn't always know how to do it. And so that moved us from an adversarial relationship to really the kind of relationship where the development community wanted to do business in our county, and where they did have respect for our fire marshals. And that just continued to build on itself, to starting out with a 90% rejection rate to within about 3 or 4 months, we were at a 90% approval rate, which was a complete turnaround, just due to being able to get out of our box and reframe. So thanks, Al.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And again, some of the examples we talked about while researching and developing this course is that we think in the mindset of a firefighter, a fire officer, police officers think in that police officer mindset, and we tend to make assumptions to things that are in our world, and we're used to it. It's our comfort zone. We're working in that box again, and we're comfortable there, and we tend to make some assumptions there. And when we talk about being transparent, informing our superiors, making that information known, we have to make sure we're thinking outside of just our assumptions. Not everybody assumes the same way. So just start to think about how you're really going to make application to thinking outside of the box. Kate?
We thought this might be a good place just to pause. As you'll recall, the title of the webinar is Critical Thinking, What is it? And just revisit this core definition again. We're going to talk about deciding what you believe, why you believe it. Do you believe it just because you always have? Do you believe it just because you were trained, you're thinking in a firefighter way? Do you believe it because of data that you believe is reliable? What you believe, why you believe it, and we'll talk going forward about what you should do about it. I'm hoping that the folks who offered definitions of critical thinking in the chat recognize their ideas here on this slide, but we'll take a quick pause in case there's anything else anyone wants to put into the chat or throw in as a question before we move any further.
Well, John would say, in watching the chat, Kate, and I'm sure you have, I see several of our audience members, I think they understand a little bit about it. They're using some of the words, analytical methods, synthesizing knowledge, discerning, some of the things that you all talked about in your planning. So I think you're and evaluating problems, another one. So I think you guys are heading in the right direction. Yeah,
like I was saying, every firefighter I've talked with about this has had a pretty core understanding, and my students do too. A lot of folks that I talk with about critical thinking, when they see this definition, it resonates really deeply. We haven't had words necessarily, all of us, to talk about this, but we get a sense of what it means. So Al then is going to tee up one of the frameworks we've been talking about that we hope can be useful to you as you think about critical thinking on the job.
Not something that's overly new to you. It's just an example. This is an example of something that was a framework for critical thinking that was given to me many years ago by a mentor of mine, just to work through analyzing and problem solving through different issues. And later on, I think Kevin will talk about timing and those kind of things, but just hitting on these highlights of understanding the situation, immediate action, informing superiors, recommend action, document, follow-up. How do we work through that? So we'll talk through each one of these and share just one example of how you might work through. I'm sure, again, as Chief Buckman talked about, many of you on the webinar are talking the language. You may have a great example, and please share that. Send that to Chief Buckman, send it in to the VCOS. But definitely share that out with your neighbors if you have a successful critical thinking model that works for you. So understanding the situation, obviously we need to work through understanding what the challenge is that we're facing. This is an example that my friends and colleagues know is an important framework for me. Leadership on the Line by Heifetz and Linsky. This is a executive fire officer program book and application for technical challenges and adaptive challenge. There's so much wrapped into this that as the three of us were talking to develop this program, we can spend an entire webinar and plus that talking about technical challenges and adaptive challenges and how you make that application into things that you're facing. And as you work through challenges over and over again, it's practice. It's like any other thing that we do, sports, anything that you do, practicing this and learning to approach that challenge, whether it's a technical challenge or an adaptive challenge. And Kate, I think maybe you would chime in here real quick. There were some other versions of that was discussed as well, words that others may hear.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks, at least in the policy community, have been talking for a few years about wicked challenges, ones that may truly have no accurate single optimum solution. Vocabulary that I've been using on some of these areas includes complex versus complicated challenges. So perhaps some of you who are looking at really deeply interconnected, many player, many factor problems are seeing other words like that.
Thanks. So quickly again, like we talked about, we could spend a lot of time talking about these different challenges. We talk about technical challenges, and as you see here, these can be addressed through policies and directives. We can put out a policy of how to do we're going to do a different hose load. We're going to do a different type of lead out, or we're going to do this in a standard operating procedure. These are technical challenges. Doesn't necessarily mean they're easy to solve, but there's a way to figure it out. We can see that pathway to work through it. So when we're thinking about challenges, and again, the basis of critical thinking is that what is the challenge? Let's define that challenge that we're looking at. Again, this is an example that I think has a lot of applications in your leadership role of determining what it is. Can we write a standard operating procedure and just get people to do that differently? Or do we have an adaptive challenge, which really requires a shift in that in challenges and challenges your belief? So we think about back to those earlier slides of how do we get out of our box, and how do we start getting people to think differently outside of that box. And just writing a procedure or writing a rule is not going to solve this issue very quickly. It requires new discoveries. It requires a change in thinking. It requires a cultural change that shifts an organization. We need to think about this differently because we are so used to working in here that now we're wanting to work outside of that box. So again, looking at how we would apply the challenge, think about what we are facing to really define it. In the EFO program, we talk about defining the pain. When many of you who may have gone through EFO, it's thinking about when we're writing that applied research problem and report, we want to get to the root of the issue. We can't continue to treat the symptoms over and over again. We need to find what's really causing the pain to address that issue. And that's a huge part of critical thinking. We keep throwing things at the symptoms. We're going to continue to have the root issue that we've not gotten to the pain of that issue. So you can read here a quote out of Heifetz and Linsky talking about not being able to identify the real challenge. One of the single most common sources of a leadership failure is not identifying those. So I think that's a great message to send and let sink into us to say, we really need to identify the pain. We really need to identify what that problem is. At this point, we'll move to Kevin. Again, we keep looking for, let's have a conversation about it. Let's chat about it. If there's anything in here that you have a question about that we've talked about, adaptive technical changes and leading through these challenges, please throw that question up onto the chat.
Yeah,
Kevin?
Hale, I think one of the great metaphors that's used in the Heifetz and Linsky's Leadership on the Line book is to be able to when you're dealing with adaptive change to get up on the balcony and look down. So in other words, being able to see the big picture, and that requires us in the fire service to be able to see beyond the first due area of our station or even beyond the borders of the jurisdiction that we serve. Being able to see what are the best practices across the nation, and what are the standards, and what are the new experiences that are occurring that we're capturing lessons learned, and to be able to use our network of colleagues from across the country. So those are all necessary for us to be able to find new and novel ways of approaching a very rapidly changing operating environment that we find ourselves in the fire service.
And that's a great point, Kevin. I think when we talk about how we remove ourselves outside of that situation to try to address the real problem, when we're talking about thinking critically, if you're in the fog and the noise and everything that's going on around you, a great point about Heifetz and Linsky used that up on the balcony, but can't see the forest for the trees, or whatever other phrase you want to use, that if you're going to think critically, you have to get out of the fog and the noise and all that to remove yourself to really look at the global picture of the situation you're facing.
And
if I may, I'll throw in here too, when we talk about comparing technical versus adaptive challenges, even if you are able to take a step back or step up, one of the things that distinguishes the two environments is whether you can even discern a single set of causes that are the root of the pain. In a technical challenge, causation tends to be pretty steady. And so if you can find that root problem, if you can dig past the symptoms, you usually can discern what a clear set of causes is. But those adaptive challenges, causation may be quite literally impossible to find, particularly in prospect, particularly when you're in the problem looking forward. There may be a changing set of circumstances that come together that mean that the solution you think looks good, even if you've thought really hard about it, you've thought really hard about what you believe the core cause is, and you believe you have reasons for understanding that that is a cause of your pain. On any given day, it might not actually be the only thing that's causing that pain. And so having patience and the ability to recognize that you've got that changing terrain that you're on can be a really hard thing to learn.
yeah,
And John has something. I'm looking at the chat, and Stephen D talked about critical thinking and how it's a lot like command presence. And so, Al, you're talking about how do you define it? How do you? Well, my question relates to that, or not my question, but based upon that conversation is like, we're visual kind of people. So what does it look like? What does a critical thinker look like? We know what having command presence looks like. Is there some way that you all could describe what a person who is a critical thinker looks like?
well, we're going to give some examples, and we'll use a way of performing analysis. But I think that some of the red flags for what it isn't is when you have somebody that says, well, we want to do this because that's the way we've always done it. That's a red flag to me, that is not something that's critical thinking. And something that was mentioned earlier was the why you want to do something. I've found that when firefighters are asking questions, they're searching for the why. And there are chiefs out there who find that offsetting, that I have all these firefighters that just keep asking these questions. Well, they're trying to understand, and they want to know the why. And if you're a critical thinker, you should be able to answer the why question for them. And so a big part of what we're trying to do with critical thinking is persuading. And I know one of the major fatal flaws that I've had with addressing issues in the early part of my career was I got confused. I would think of what needed to be an adaptive change as a technical change. And to me, the answer of what we needed to do was obvious. But there were stakeholder groups that didn't see it the same way I did. And so some of the responses that I would get back is to the effect of, you're just jamming this down our throats. And so I had to learn the skills to be able to adapt, to bring in the various stakeholders and understand where our areas of interest overlap, and being able to compromise and to be able to use data analysis properly and to develop persuasion skills. If my staff could come to me with a solution that I had already knew what the solution was, that was much more effective than me giving them the solution.
All right. Well, thank you. Hey, I hated to distract you, but I know we got a time schedule here. But those of you that are on the webinar, Kate has listed 9 characteristics in the chat room. I encourage you to go to the chat room and look at those. So, Al, back to you.
Well, and I'll just offer that Kevin's material there illustrates the importance of being logical and clear. The stakeholders he was talking about hadn't yet understood why where he was coming from. He needed to be clear. He needed to be compelling to them. The logic helps him explain why he was promoting what he was. And the critical thinking needed to include all those perspectives he was talking about. So I actually thought it was a great illustration of the way that we might see some of those 9, not all 9 characteristics are the important ones in every moment, but that was a great illustration of which ones were important in those cases. But yeah, we'll keep running that in the chat if people are engaged. With an example we thought we could talk to too that would get at some more of this as well.
And I think a quick key point to what Kevin, you said there is, again, if you look back at the leadership on the line, that the subtitle there is leadership is dangerous. So, how do you apply that leadership perspective? Sometimes it takes a while for people to come along to the idea as you continuously provide that information. But sometimes it can be a challenge in and of itself, because people are saying, well, what are you doing here? Well, stick with me. We're working through this problem. We're working through a critical thinking model. Not that you would say that, but it's like we're working through this model. But it can be tough for a little while.
And maybe I could add one word to the chat quote of being the incident commander. It's a benevolent incident commander, where you're respecting the thoughts of others and the input of others. So I think that was a great point to add into the chat. So thank you.
All right, Kevin, you're up.
But let's talk about the step of understanding timing of your analysis and problem solving, and determining really the question of, is immediate action required, or do we have time? So let's explore that just a little bit further. We all know that when we go to an emergency incident, and let's say it's somebody in cardiac arrest, well, we know the first thing we need to do is determine if the scene is safe for us to operate. So we're taking a couple seconds there, but then we have drilled and drilled and drilled to know what immediate actions are needed in order to save brain tissue and to successfully resuscitate that patient. But that kind of immediate action isn't always something that is required. So one skill that we need to develop and to continue to hone as critical thinkers is determining what our decision space is. Because you're going to be pressured to make decisions. There's going to be expectations for you to be decisive and to answer, to make decisions on the spot. But I caution you to step back and think about, does that decision need to be made right now? Does it need to be made even today or tomorrow? Or can we go through a process where we can get to the optimal solution? So there are variables to consider, such as what do we need to do for property conservation? But even on the fire ground, the size up isn't always done or complete when you roll up into the incident scene and take your first look. And we found that out through a line of duty investigative report that we did when I was in Prince William County, where we had a fire incident like is occurring in many places around the country, where it was an outside-in fire. When the crews got on the scene, they took immediate action to enter the home, to evacuate residents, and to begin fire suppression. Nobody went around back to see that the fire was actually adjacent to the house, burning up and into the attic space of the home. And so our lesson learned from that is we can move faster by moving slower. If we went around the back, we did the 360, and we do that 360 check before taking any action, is we could have determined we could have brought a hose line around back and controlled the fire from the outside before and controlled the incident very quickly before it really became such a tragic event for us. So again, you may feel the pressure to decide, but give yourself the opportunity to think through making that decision to determine your decision space. And when you do have time, then use that time wisely to create your own observations, to consult with others. And those of you who go to conferences and the National Fire Academy, develop a network and use those networks. Use the resources that we have with the International Association of Fire Chiefs to pose a question on KnowledgeNet to get input from others around the country. Take time to do your research and to do your data gathering and data analysis. Use your own knowledge and your own skills.
One thing, Kevin, just to talk about that our gut is going to keep telling us that we have to move fast. It tends to be like we're problem solvers in the fire service. We want to get in, address the issue, solve the problem. Our gut will tell us, in fire situations, even in the administrative situations, that we've got to get this done. So a critical thinker is going to start that gut piece that you're getting. Your gut may be telling you that you've got to get this done rapidly. Start to get in a mindset of getting out of your own head, take a deep breath, reassess the situation, and you have that space a lot of times to work within the problem. And we have to start thinking more critically in that level, as we're talking about. Our gut's telling us one thing, but let's think critically. Let's get out of our biases, our habits, and that type of stuff too.
Yeah, and just another word about the consultation, if we can go back. Use your own staff for consultation. Put this on an agenda of your executive team meeting. Consult with other stakeholders, whether if you're a volunteer company, to discuss it with officers or with another duty crew, or there's multiple consultation opportunities that you have to seek input And by doing that, it's participatory, and you're also building buy-in for the final decision.
So talking about the next step here is informing your superiors and making sure that they know what's going on. We understand the situation. We have to make sure that our bosses, whether it's your village council, your fire district board, whatever level you're at, the next level of chief, the fire chief, the village administrator, however that works, making sure that you're informing the people around you. And just a familiar use and a familiar application is, what are the conditions that led to this action? What are we doing, or what needs action? Actions that we've taken so far, we know that whether it's in an administrative type of decision making, adaptive or technical challenges that have to be addressed right away, we're addressing those to the people who need to know that what action have we taken to slow an issue, slow a problem, what actions do we have planned going forward, and also what do you need from them. Councils, boards, village administrators, the next level in your organization, if you're a firefighter, a company officer, or chief officer, battalion chief, looking to that next level, looking to those people to see what support they can give you. And we talked earlier about the immediate action and understanding the situation. Whatever those situations come your way, when you start thinking critically, be willing to bring in that resource. There are people on your boards, people at different levels of your organization, people who are even, we talk about the needs from superiors, but you have some subject matter experts sitting in the ranks of your organization too, sometimes on some of these matters. If you're talking about something that you don't have a knowledge about, of an intricate knowledge, that you could go and seek that resource. So we're talking here about informing superiors. So just make sure that they are informed so that they don't get that surprise. The one thing is that you don't want your bosses to read this in the newspaper. You don't want them to hear it from someone else in the community, whether you're a big or small community. In a small community, things travel very fast. Information like that travels fast. So the best advice I can give you with critical situations that you're facing that have a strong potential of hitting the news waves, or that it's going to spread through social media or other avenues, that your superiors, your bosses are hearing it from you. And so they're hearing it from you right away. Even if you get out ahead of this and nothing ever comes of it, there's nothing ever out on social media, or it doesn't hit the news waves, you still have gotten out ahead of this so that they don't hear it from someone else, because that is not a good situation for you. And that's a message to carry to all ranks of your organization, that we all have areas that we work in. And so not always does the fire chief have to know that we broke the handle on a hand tool or something like that. But we know that there are situations that have to be addressed up the chain of command. And we know, if we're talking to the fire chief, that we can let them know what's going on. And it opens up their decision space as well. And so we work through these things. We give a lot of opportunity to collaborate and understand from others.
And Al, let me just also make the point that inform your boss about the good things that are occurring too, because that is just as important. We just gave a presentation to our city council, and we wanted to share good news. And we were learning about great things that happened in the department that we know that our elected officials would want to know about, because we had to go out and rattle the cages a little bit to get that. So it's not just bad news.
Yeah.
But I can tell you, bosses don't like hearing about bad news from other outside sources. They want to hear it from you.
Yeah, and also my experiences as you work into other projects or things that are coming down the line at you, getting your bosses involved so that they know we're facing this situation. I'm getting you prepared that we're working through this problem. We may be facing this, or we have to start setting ourselves in a plan. So again, opening up that decision space gives more people information and working into that so that, again, when you show up at the county board meeting or the fire district board meeting or village board meeting, there's no surprises, which all of a sudden, hey, we have this issue, or hey, we have this need, or hey, we have this, and it's a big surprise, and then you're probably more than likely delayed even in your timing. Kate?
One of the things that one of the framings that I've liked about one of the ways that people talk about critical thinking is that when you know what you believe and why you believe it, you can explain what you believe to other people, which is what we've been talking about here when we talk about consultation. But why do you even want to do that? It's so that you can invite other people to decide whether they agree with you, right? And if you disagree, now if you've thought really carefully about whether you agree on what a proposed solution is, or even what the proposed problem is, which can be a really hard thing to decide, knowing what you agree about and what you disagree about can be really important to plowing through all the politics and the interpersonal and lack of expertise, lack of data that we face, being able to really be clear about what problems we're trying to solve together. And in the chat, we've been talking a little bit about what problems you're going to say the chief is going to solve. Thank you for your interest, stakeholders. This is something we have good reason to believe we can solve ourselves. Or if they're ignoring you, gosh, hey gang, the fire department has a problem. We have good reason to believe we cannot solve it ourselves. Here was why we invite you to decide whether you agree that you also need to help us. Every kind of problem is going to show up in the fire service, right? So many, many examples come up of where we can use this intellectually disciplined, transparent, consultative process it might feel like it's making things harder at first, but it's go slow to go smooth and go fast.
Yeah, and understanding, as you talk about that, understanding those stakeholders again and what their interest and expertise is, whether it be council members or whatever the case may be, to be able to have that understanding of, like, there are certain things that I could take to our board, and there are board members who are a lot more interested in this topic than they are in another topic because of their interest, again, their habits, the things that they do in life. And so they're a huge resource often for that critical thinking of how to resolve this issue.
Okay. Critical thinking and performing analysis and problem solving, and I'll even expand this to opportunity seeking, is action oriented. The work that you do with critical thinking in performing this analysis and decision making process can take hard work and skill and knowledge and putting it all together into action. And we talked about decision space. Sometimes that's out of your control because some of these initiatives can take months or even years to complete. And you need to have perseverance and resilience to be able to work through them. So I'm going to give you an example. I use a process that was instilled in me and in my 38 years in Prince William County. We call it a framework for analysis, where we go through each one of these steps that are in the bullets of this slide. And we've used this within the Northern Virginia region and the National Capital Region. And the example that I want to share with you, I'm going to go through it quickly, not necessarily completely, but sufficiently enough where you can get the sense for how we went through our process to a successful outcome. So the situation that we were facing was that, and this was after 9/11 and being involved in a campaign style incident at the Pentagon, where firefighters were contaminated with carcinogens and other hazardous materials on their personal protective gear. And we had a concern that we weren't protecting our firefighters sufficiently. So we wanted to make a proposal to the National Capital Region for Homeland Security funds to help us fix that problem. So we framed out our background, and the background was that firefighters are exposed to more carcinogens and contaminants causing occupational illnesses. That these exposures are resulting in known firefighter occupational illnesses and even deaths. But as we discussed the background further, we added additional points that firefighter gear can become soaked with water that other contaminants cling to, as well as when you're operating in an IDLH, your gear could be completely soaked with sweat, causing miserable working conditions for our firefighters, especially in the dead of cold or some of these extremely hot summers that we have. And we also identified that we're responding to more campaign style emergency incidents than we ever have, with multiple occupational periods, and that we needed to be able to refresh the gear in some way so to remove those contaminants. And our emergency call volume is increasing, so we can clear one incident and maybe go and right to the next incident without any downtime. And also we identified that the cost of personal protective equipment is escalating beyond the rate of inflation, which was making it difficult for us to purchase, to do the kinds of things that we were thinking about doing without grant funding. So we went through a process of identifying the key issues, and another way of looking at the key issues is what are the factors that we need to evaluate. So the factors that we considered was the health and safety of firefighters as number one, and we put these in priority order. The service impact to the public, that if gear was damaged in some way or we had to take it out of service, that we would have firefighters that wouldn't be able to respond to the next call. The next issue was firefighter working conditions. We want our crews to be completely focused on the emergency and even in an uncomfortable situation to be as comfortable as possible. Next was the financial or fiscal considerations, and that would be the cost of whatever we proposed. And then next was the timing. Was this something that was urgent to be done, or what kind of time did we have to make a decision and to implement? And then our sixth item was, were there any legal implications? So from there, we identify our options, and I'm going to name a few. This isn't a complete list, but the first option was issue all firefighters a second set of bunker gear and then install extractors in each of the stations. Second was to issue all active firefighters a second set of bunker gear, but keep one set of gear with the less active. So I'm in the chief's position. I didn't need two sets of gear. One would be more than satisfactory for me. Third option was to contract to have a private sector vendor who could respond to take the contaminated gear and to have spare gear that they can issue to the firefighters while their gear was off being cleaned and inspected. And then the fourth, and this should be in each one of your decision-making models, was to evaluate doing nothing. And that would be maintaining the status quo. So you can make a comparison of the pros and cons against doing nothing. So I'll go through how we did the came up with the pros and cons for one of the options, and then how we made a recommendation. So issuing all firefighters a second set of gear and install extractors. On the health and safety issue, we determined that we would greatly reduce continued exposure to carcinogens and other hazardous materials, and that we would need to set a performance measure to be able to actually measure the impact over time. For our service impact, will this maintain firefighter in service time, especially for those campaign style emergency incidents, or where we have busy units that respond from one emergency to the next? The working conditions, we wanted to be able to have 99% of the time firefighters will have clean bucker gear when responding to incidents. For the cost, we knew this option would, and I'm just going to use a hypothetical number, would cost us $25 million to outfit all the firefighters in the national capital region. But we also identified that there'd be recurring costs because, as you know, gear doesn't last forever, and we would need to replace it and issue second set of gear for any new members. So the recurring cost would be $2.5 million that we built into our model, that the grant would take the upfront costs, and each fire department would be responsible for maintaining the program with the reoccurring cost. We identified that the timing was urgent, that we knew that there was a grant cycle that we had to go through, but we would go through that process with all due speed, and that we would issue the gear within a year and stay within the grant timing. Then the legal requirements, we identified those legal requirements to maintain the FEMA requirements for reporting and inventory management and doing all the legal work that we need to do to be in an audit-ready position. And then we had the do nothing option, where for health and safety, that we communicated to the policymakers that we would expect occupational disease to escalate with increasingly serious cases with poorer outcomes. Service, that there would be less consistent optimal emergency service performance because units would have to go out of service when gear was either damaged or gross decon wasn't going to be sufficient. Working conditions, that we identified that many emergency incidents where firefighters responded, they'd have to respond with wet or sweaty gear. And that this was the lowest cost option in the short term, but we identified that over the long run, there would be much higher costs for medical costs and early retirements. And the timing wasn't applicable, and we didn't have any legal constraints for the grant itself. And when we compared and contrasted all of the options, we were able to clearly show to the policymakers that option one was our best option. And then we identified what steps would be necessary to take the action, and by who was going to be responsible and when each step of the process would be done. So, and remember that some of these improvements and some of the issues that we identified, that we would have to set up performance measures and being able to do inventory. So there was ongoing action work that we needed to do. And during the implementation, I'll just share with you that my belief is we have to be prepared to follow the 80-20 rule, where 20% of the implementation we do is going to take 80% of our time. And that's mostly towards the end of the process. So that's the example that I wanted to share with you. And we can go to the next slide. Al?
Well, and I'll just jump in quickly. I don't know, Al or Kevin, how much you've been able to follow the chat, but what I tried to do was for our viewers keep track through Kevin's example of how the choices that he and his team were making invoked a lot of the skills and practices that go into robust critical thinking. Kevin, your stories are making it easy to point to good illustrations, so thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And, as we move through the framework here, documentation, this is something at this point shouldn't be new to anyone, to document what you've been through. And that's documenting all of the relevant information, what you learned, how you learned that. A lot of times referring to just journaling and keeping that information. For institutional learning and memory and for yourself. Some of the things you have to be aware of is how you document that information, whether you, whatever your state, wherever you're from, about record keeping and record transparency, Freedom of Information Act, things that would be able to be requested by the public. So as you make the documentation, check with your legal department, check with them about how that documentation can go, what could it look like under a Freedom of Information. But more so, we're talking about also documenting. Certainly you're going to document things that led to disciplinary documentation, coaching documentation. You're going to put that on performance reviews. You're going to have documents related to a performance improvement plan that you're going to outline there for maybe a particular employee. But as you're working through situations that you're employing the critical thinking model or thinking for some new challenge, it is beneficial just to document, well, how did I find this? How did I research this? What led to a successful research in getting to an answer where I was looking for? Whether it's journaling in a journal book, again, you're going to have to talk with your legal about how that works. In some places, basically everything that's on a public computer in a public property could be requested. But just think about it from a standpoint of, I'm putting down these notes of how I learned through this process, conditions that led to the action, why am I having to go through this challenge, technical or adaptive. I think more so you're going to be using this journaling through some adaptive changes, but any kind of situation you're facing, and I use situation, but any kind of challenge that you're facing, how did you work through that, and documenting that information so that you could look back on the next challenge that you have to see where did I learn and what made it better. Kate, you have something?
Yeah, one of the things that hadn't come up yet in the conversations we've been having about the webinar is the note that you can't be a learning organization if you aren't capturing and sharing knowledge. So a lot of the examples that Al's just talked through include material and content that's really important for us as managers in an organization, but also when we think about our role in developing an organization and what it can stand for. Here too, you want to capture the positive, right? This is not just about make sure you don't get caught with a lack of documentation that was required or having captured things outside of appropriate executive channels. It's not just a warning against doing the bad thing, but it's an invitation to invite everyone with you to be learning and sharing what they're learning.
And I think that we in the fire service are good at learning from the emergency incidents where we do after action reviews, post-incident analysis. It's really advisable to use that set of knowledge and skills to do your after action on a critical thinking initiative that you undertook to understand what went well that we could do more of and what didn't go so well that we can improve upon the next time.
Yeah, and also it leads to that institutional knowledge. You know, you are not going to be in that position forever. So whether it's a major project coming to your community or you know, the positives of new things coming in that challenge your operational stance, but new developments, staffing plans, those kind of things. That's critical thinking. To Kate's point, we're certainly not just talking about the negative, but the things that you are doing to progress the organization in many steps of the way involves that critical thinking model. How do we get to that? How do we apply the challenges that the fire service is facing today with staffing and not as many people applying for these positions, and certainly volunteerism in a crisis mode of people not volunteering. We can't keep doing the same thing over and over again expecting different results. So we have to think, how do we think differently? And so documenting those type of things, providing whether it be policy or procedures for the institutional knowledge of the people who come after you into those positions that you're occupying now, it provides them with historical documents of, well, it worked then, let's see if we can apply it now. Next is follow-up. The actions you've implemented and the critical thinking journey. Again, like where are we at? Are we staying on track? What adjustments do we have to make? Because as you're addressing those challenges, there are going to be new challenges that will come your way. So as we look at a term that can be used as SWOT analysis or things like that, however you apply, we talk about different types of framework, but when you look at, well, we're addressing this challenge, we're thinking critically, we're thinking out of that box, we're staying on track, but as we get through working through these challenges, there will be new challenges and there will be new opportunities. We will find weaknesses in the situation that we're trying to address that we'll have to bring the strengths of our organization and plug those in. Coaching and mentoring. How do we continue to coach the stakeholders? We talked about board members all the way to the firefighter. How do we coach and mentor them through the process that we're going through? And a big thing here is practice, practice, practice. How do we practice critical thinking? Going back to how we introduce this is that this is an introduction of what critical thinking is. And so we're thinking we need to dig a whole lot deeper and you need to do that research, but practice and practice and practice the art of critical thinking. And be willing to share that information with those around you, because there's a regional approach, and I've seen some of the statements in the chats that, you know, some people struggle with this. Well, coach and mentor them through the basics of what you may have learned here. But as you get through a challenge and you learn from the mistakes you made and you learn from the opportunities that challenge presented, coach other people around you and just continue to practice that. And one of the things in a presentation that I've done before is the people who you can reach out to, the confidants out there that you can call and bounce this stuff off of to continue to practice that art of critical thinking. And, you know, the last bullet point there being tying your education experiences together builds wisdom. Everyone that's presenting here today, we don't know everything. And the fact is, as we've gone through presenting and researching to prepare this presentation, we've learned things from each other. And so when you go into that, be open-minded that no one knows everything. And so as we work through the critical thinking model, how do we get better at it, and how do we do better things the next time? Kate or Kevin, anything on that?
All of us are smarter than any one of us.
And I do want to iterate how much fun it has been to be in these conversations and how much I have learned from this encounter. So thank you so much for making this experience possible.
Well, this is John again. I just want to thank you all, but I'm looking for questions. I don't really have any questions, but as Kate said, great conversation in the chat. And so, but I do have something that maybe you guys can, maybe again, we got a few minutes left of dig a little deeper into how do we get people to realize that they are not getting to the root issue. I think that was mentioned early on, is that they think that, oh, okay, I thought about it and this is what we're going to do, but they haven't really got to the root issue. Any suggestions on that?
I'll start real quick. Is that I go back a lot of times to EFO, such a wonderful program, but what it taught me too was, again, looking at that root issue. But I had people around me in my class that I would say, well, I'm thinking of this problem, and they would quickly say, that's not the problem. And again, it's I think, and Kate probably talk more to this, but it's like, I got to get out of my own head because I'm in the midst of this. And, you know, at that point I'm in EFO program, but learning to get up out of that issue, because I would over and over again say, well, this is the problem. And someone else in the class or the instructor would say, no, that's not the problem. Dig deeper. And so I think I dug a little deeper, and then I'd say, okay, I got it. And they'd say, nope, you're not there yet. So I think it is just continuous communications with those people around us.
And Kate, before you, I'd love to have you comment on that, but there was another word that Al, one of you had on your slide, but you didn't really mention it, but we all learned it as a National Fire Camp, called paradigm shifts, your thinking. So Kate, I'll just let you, maybe you want to talk to root issue as well as paradigms.
Yeah, I actually had a long and really constructive conversation this afternoon with a colleague about what is the real problem. We're facing a challenge where we need to make a policy proposal for management, and we think we're going to offer something that's pretty going to be a hard thing for management to approve, that we're going to ask for resources that are scarce. And she kept saying, well, we just need to tell them that we're not being able to do this part of our job. And I'm like, but I think that they may decide that they don't actually need us to do that part of the job. So is it really a problem? Maybe this is something we don't even need resources for at all. One of the techniques that she and I have used is to use a structured approach called Y times 5, where you say, I think this is a problem. Well, why do you believe that? I believe it because I think we're not able to do our job. Well, why do you think we need to do our job? Well, I believe we need to do our job because of this. Well, but why do you believe that's in play? And to Douglas's comment in the chat, we talked about that. So it's not a problem. If you require that you have that full on, you have to ask why 5 times. If everyone will agree just to play that game, you might get people's patience. You might get people willing to have that conversation just a little bit longer. And that, I think, is where you start to get to this paradigm breaking. A paradigm is a mental model you have, is a set of constraints that you use to help understand what is relevant to a problem, what kind of data matter, what is going to be significant. And like Al was talking about earlier, when we talked about being in the box, our brains do this because you can't make decisions if you have to think about all the things. You need some kind of initial scope to help you know what you're actually supposed to be focusing on. And if you pick the right paradigm, solutions really pop to the fore very quickly. If you are in a situation, though, like an adaptive challenge, where maybe multiple paradigms are true and are all relevant, you might need to push yourself to think, have we really thought about it from all the perspectives that are going to be useful to us? Here's another thing that I'm talking about with a bunch of friends of mine. It's hard to know whether someone who's telling you, I think you should look about it from a different way, are they brilliant? Or are they just a troublemaker? Or are they just missing the point, right? Being able to tell the difference between what's going to be useful and what is going to be a rabbit hole sometimes is really hard to know. And just some of the comments in the chat too about like, when do you as a leader invite and welcome even a junior person or a non-expert to tell you, hey, you know what? I think maybe there's this other perspective you should be tapping, or hey, in the bunk room last night, a bunch of us newbies wondered why we're doing it this way. Are they probies who don't know what they're talking about? Or are they people who have a really important perspective and a new paradigm? Sometimes it takes some experimentation and willingness to keep talking about it. Sometimes you do pull the plug.
I would just add to that to say, again, that it's so important to screen, if you will, through the people that are those confidants or people that will tell you, because you need someone to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. Have that conversation about, I think you're doing the right thing. Like, you need somebody to have you have to have that comfort level with those people that I want you to tell me. I mean, I'll take, for example, Chief Buckman here. Is that I know Chief Buckman will tell me what I need to hear, and he has done that at times. And and
you've done it for me too.
Right. And I think that is an open, honest communication, that this is not personal. And the people that I call for those questions to say, hey, I'm having this struggle or this issue. I need you to tell me this is what I'm thinking of doing. And they will say, that's dumb. Don't do that. I need that person to say, friendly and respectively, that I'm headed down the wrong road. If you surround yourself with a bunch of yes people, then you are not critically thinking.
I'll let Kevin make a comment, but Al, what you just talked about is trust. That 5-letter word in a relationship, and whether it's the fire department or your spouse, your marriage, it's about trust. Kevin, you got anything to add? And Kate had a comment too.
Well, I would just say that another element of this, to your question, John, is to reserve judgment when you go into a situation. And I think back to my college days and taking science classes and using the scientific method. What is the one thing that scientists are supposed to do when they do an experiment? Okay, I'll tell you. They have to prove the null hypothesis, not their hypothesis. So that basically, my job as a scientist is to prove myself wrong. So asking yourself the critical questions to challenge yourself. And a lot of us believe that we start with getting data and then we create the stories and then we build our beliefs. But the research is telling us that people come in with their beliefs first, and then they try to match those beliefs with their stories, and then let's capture data that will prove my beliefs. So reserve judgment and prove your null hypothesis.
All right. Thank you. Kate?
I was just thinking, John, about the first conversation you and I had about this webinar and this project about teaching critical thinking in VCOS. And one of the bugaboo issues that you were talking about is when you go into your county government meeting year after year after year, and you're still talking about the same problem you thought you solved, it's a sign that you haven't figured out what the problem was yet, right? But I think this comes back to documentation, and to Kevin's point, it's about keeping track of the data. One of the things that can be really hard particularly when we're talking about adaptive challenges that shift all the time, is we drift from our understanding of what we think the problem is as we attempt different solutions, and as the people involved in the situation change, the council people turn over, you've got a new deputy, you've got a new set of probies, whoever it is. Having kept track, did we actually talk about the same exact problem in the county report every year for the past 10 years? And compare that to what solutions did we think we had tried that were going to be good ones? And compare it to Al's list of who did I ask about this? Who were the experts that I actually engaged with on this? Keeping track of, are we still solving the safe problem? Or maybe we've been asking the same question at the county meeting every year, but everything else was changing around us, right? The department budget got halved. We did get a new chief. We got a new set. We all had turnover at the junior level. Keeping track of what you're really thinking through can be a big challenge. To the comment about like, when do we accept pressure to stop thinking and just take immediate action, can make it really hard to keep your eye on that critical thinking ball over time.
And the
All right. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Through the follow-up piece real quick is that, as you were saying, you go through that follow-up and now we've realized it's a different challenge. So we go back to the top of the model and we understand, okay, this is the root issue. Let's start working down that chain again.
Yeah. All right. We are at the end of our webinar, but I'll give each one of you another final comments, and I'll go to Kevin first. Anything you want to say to sum this up?
From my experience, critical thinking is a lifelong journey. And there were some terms that Kate used in the definition that really is the epitome of the highest level of learning. And it's the kind of things that is developed in upper level courses in college and in graduate school. So I encourage everybody on the webinar to continue the journey of developing your critical thinking skills. And as Al eloquently stated, practice, practice, practice.
All right, Kate, any closing comments?
Just that critical thinking is not what you have, it's something you do, and it is a team and contact sport. So it can be a lot of fun to work on with other people.
Good point. Al?
That's been great to work on this project. I guess what I would leave people with, we use that framework, which is a desk reference. For me, it's on my desk. It's in a bright yellow piece of paper that I'm challenged to I have a challenge. I go pull that piece of paper. Plus, again, the Heifetz and Linsky leadership book is a great desk reference. It never gathers dust in my office that I'm faced with a challenge that I can go look at some sections there to try to figure out. So find what that is for you to begin going down that critical thinking and practice, practice, practice. So thanks for the opportunity to be a part.
Well, thank you. And Al's going, man, every time I talk to John, I get more work to do. So that's really how this all started, when the VCOS has the leaders in critical thinking as part of their brand. And then got Kevin involved and Kate involved. So I will say, on behalf of these three presenters, we'll probably do this again in about 3 months, maybe part 2, to keep that enthusiasm going. The VCOS is looking at how do we create like a 12-session webinar series on this that would go, over 12 months. So we're looking at different things out there. But I appreciate these three working so hard to develop a good program, something that's useful. I'm looking at the chat, and good comments from that. You guys can look at them as well. And then if we go back to the slides here, I'll do my finish up here, and just the things that you will get a survey. Please tell us what you think. Give us suggestions on what we can do different. And if you do want this to be done again, or another session of it, please let us know. And so with that, we have the thank you to the attendees and thank you to our presenters. We appreciate everybody worked really hard on this. So again, thank you very much. Have a great day and be safe out there.